going to add to this conversation is that the verse says, take your task
To the
to the number
982.
982. And what does the treasure poem say that your task is? A little digging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
like
take a little digging to the 982. Like, come on.
that 982 is so damn obscure. Like if you don't know what that is, it would take solving that verse to know what that is. You know?
Absolutely.
I mean, we take it for granted now, and it's just so direct, but it's because we
Yeah.
already know.
Exactly.
You are now live, by the way, on both YouTube and Facebook. I don't know.
All right. Here we go.
Oh God, I've never wanted to open Excel during a treasure.
You don't want to look at my spreadsheet?
I'm actually super interested in your spreadsheet. Mine went nowhere.
That's two shots. Two shots.
Oh fuck! God damn.
There's been a lot of spreadsheets posted on Facebook past week.
Yeah, it's
So
5
pretty
o'clock in the
detailed.
afternoon. I'm gonna do the shots later.
They'll just get a ticker out. Oh.
But yeah, like I can't. I tried. I was telling Graydon before we started streaming. Like I tried to go back and do the columns, but I tried to. What tripped me up was preconceived notions, ideas that I had already had. Right, it was hard to remove those biases, and I just kept doing the same thing that I saw everybody doing on Facebook, which was creating a list of columns and then interjecting everything that you think in order to make a pattern, right? I couldn't, it was really difficult for me to just go back to the book and just match things up without that. You didn't find that difficult? You guys didn't
Me
find
personally,
that difficult?
no. I mean, I was doing it before because like I just read through the book over and over and over till like it loses all meaning and I'm just like left with like a collection of words. I guess. So I've
Yeah.
got like multiple sheets, but I tried to take this made me want to like revisit that because like what have I potentially missed or what are different groupings or categorizations that I hadn't thought of? How can I turn left instead of turning right? You know what I mean? Like that was kind of the approach I took was like, how could I look at it differently if I've been looking at it wrong?
Yeah.
You know,
What are
thinking, trying to
some,
think objectively.
what are some of the categories that you came up with, Chris, on your most
Well,
recent read?
the the biggest ones for me, I guess like some of them are probably more obvious than others. Because like I always take the jewel as the starting point because that it is it's for a hunt for 12 treasures. So like at the baseline, we're given this like list of 12 jewels. So okay, cool. That's where I start. And then we learn that the jewels are birthstones. So what do we get out of that? We've got the month, we've got the flower. You can bring zodiac into it. Like you can find these different things that kind of grow out of the information that we're given. Cool. If you can extrapolate that further, zodiac turns into like elements: earth, air, water, fire, and that those are specifically also referenced in the text of the book. I think it's in the Vanishing, which is my least favorite section to read.
Oh, but it's just so interesting.
I love it.
So, right, where is it? It's right here. So the tribes people, for instance, had deep respect for earth, air, fire, and water, and this was much appreciated by the fair folk, who are, as you know, the natural children of those elements. So, like, there's at least some sort of reason for us to try to like extrapolate to that level. So those are some broad groupings we can do because the elements will take the months and group them into buckets of 3.
Uh-huh.
But then after that, I kind of like take the months and group them into buckets of 3.
That was Tim.
Okay. So
Tim, we have
that's, like,
feedback.
After that, I kind of like ate the months and
Oh, he just muted. Okay. Sorry.
so that was one sort of path that I went down. It's like, how can I bucket things differently and then start to see how I can fill those buckets with information from the book, right? So it's like all of a sudden things started to stand out. Like the first page of the story Simply Told, it's like talks about a giant hiding in the slope of a mountain. So does that mean the Ruby puzzle, which has the giants, the Deeves, has some sort of relationship to Earth, the mountains? Maybe. Um, the dragon blows fire through a gust of wind, which seemed like a really weird comparison to make. Like, why is that what he chose to use in that next sentence there? So some of those things just started making me see if I could group the fair folk or the native tribes against some of those, like earth, air, water, fire, and is there a way I can like bucket that together? So that was
A
like
lot of
one path I went down.
some of the litany lines could be attributed quite easily to those four as well.
And some of the verses, like the air smells sweet, the water veers, like ones that we've already talked about. Like, why is it Wonderstone's hearth? Is that important? Did he choose like a fireplace motif in that line for a reason? It could also just be the way that he wrote and some like
Have you read any of his other work? Like, have you read Dragon World?
no, but I used to read the Choose Your Own Adventure ones when I was a kid, but like that was
It's hard. It's hard to compare to that, though.
Yeah.
He's got a weird writing style, which, especially when you're in fantasy, just throwing in weird words for different things. So it's hard to extract what's important.
Yeah.
So, there is some. So I haven't done another read since the gift giver post. So I haven't had time to go, and I've done columns before, but I haven't done the exercise again recently. But when you were talking, Chris, you reminded me that there's some common terminology in the front of the book. Like there's specific words that he uses over and over again. Like for example, the word sweet. I mean, he uses the word sweet, gosh, probably several times in the front of the book. And I wonder if we're looking at columns and lists and trying to group certain sections of the front of the book and the lore and the vanishing together is, like for example, I know he uses the word, sweet honey when he's talking about the Chinese immigration group. And I wonder if when he's using, similar terminology or descriptive words, a synonym to sweet, if he's using that earlier in the book or in a different section, if maybe that's your hint or clue that, hey, what I'm talking about here is, related to that Chinese immigration puzzle. And then you mentioned a specific line that stood out to you. I definitely encourage anyone, especially if you haven't read the front of the book, when you read it, look for anything in that, like think about word usage. Like, why would he use that word? Like, why did he describe something that way? Especially if you read it out loud, if something sounds weird, then he probably tried really hard to put it there, but couldn't think of the exact words. And he was putting a lot of time and effort to that specific line for a specific reason. Does that make sense? Like if you're reading something, there's one line that stands out, like, hey, why is that even, that doesn't match the rest of the paragraph. Why is that even there?
Yeah.
That's probably a line that we should pay attention to.
Or he wrote it in a hurry.
Yeah, so that's my
deadline. Yeah.
That's my thing. Like so many people pay so close attention to gray in New York, right? The GREY as opposed to GRAY. And they think that's got to be some sort of concrete direct thing because it's the British way of spelling gray or whatever. And then when you look at Dragon World, he uses GRAY and GREY in two different sections of the book to describe the exact same thing. Right? Like, so is he just careless? Is he just quick?
Yeah. There's definitely, you can find both versions of gray in Secret as well.
Is it really? I
Yeah.
never paid attention.
Unfortunately so.
I have one, sorry. I have one big overarching question about the gift giver.
Oh God.
So,
What's his phone number?
Let me
there's
call
obviously,
him and ask real quick.
you could say there's a core like there's a core group of searchers that have been very so deep into the secret the past several years that they're very much aware of the months and gems and all the little references, everything, basically everything that we've talked about so far, everything that we know that's in the front of the book, everything that when you do a deep dive into the secret and you spend a lot of time in it, stuff that we know. How much does the gift giver know? Like the gift, this may not be a hobby for the gift giver. Like, yeah, they may potentially know, the locations or more than what we think, but like, do they know that we know about the connections with the litany and the gems and the months and the integrations? And, I don't know if they know that or not. So when they talk about, when they give us a nudge about putting things in columns, going through the front of the book and, seeing if you can find, patterns, they may not be aware that we've already done that and we've already found a lot of
Yeah.
patterns in the front of the book.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I assume the answer to that question is no. Because it doesn't seem like anything that has ever been posted by that account will help anyone who's been in this hunt more than a few years, right? And I think this last post, didn't it say something like I log onto Facebook around this time of year and check out the group? I think that's what happens. I think they log onto Facebook and they look at the group and they're like, whoa, this is crazy. Like maybe you should, dial it back a bit and just do this. I mean, there was a big long discussion on Discord about that. Like it nothing really seems to help people who have been doing this a while. It really just seems to be very basic stuff. So this could be a situation where it's like we already have this.
Yeah, they don't know what we know. Especially if they only log in, once or twice a year or before Christmas. A lot of the hunters that have been around for a while, they don't really post on Facebook anymore.
Yeah.
Or if they do, it's not very often. And if they do post, it's not typically going to be any of the old information that we've known for a while. So it could just be a situation where they just don't know that we know certain things.
That's my worry for sure. Especially with so many people in the group now, like
Graydon froze.
That Manitoba weather.
Always when you're going to make a point. See,
here, make this table, and I worry that it's all just referring to the items with the gem. Did I freeze there?
Yeah, a couple of times. We have no idea what you just said.
Is it working now?
Kinda.
No, internets.
Can't blame you. You Canada guys just got power.
The ice in my igloo blocks the Wi-Fi signal. Oh, you heard that? Oh, perfect. I was just saying that I worry that Byron in the press release saying interlocking patterns and JJP saying there's something staring you right in the face, and the gift giver, all this hint is, like Corey was saying, is just trying to get us to what we already know of a way of connecting the jewels to the months, to the flowers, to immigration groups. It could be all of this isn't actually pointing us anywhere of value. I worry about that too.
There was one thing, like when Palancar did the interview for that documentary, I went up there and I sat through the interview, and there was a lot of shit he said. Like there was a lot of shit he's never talked about before that was in that interview. But there was something that like immediately piqued my interest. He just kind of slipped it in, and I don't think Christina's going to add it. So I'd love to talk about it because it doesn't seem like something she cares so much about, but we absolutely will. And it kind of relates to the gift giver post in a weird way, because in there was a question about how the book was done, and he went into a very, very, very long diatribe about like how everything worked, or how everything worked, and how he and Byron worked, and yada yada yada. And he was talking about um things that uh people have already figured out, and things that are common. And he was mentioning the latitude and longitude coordinates, and he mentioned the cities, and he mentioned the months, and he mentioned the jewels, and then he was like, and the specific fair folk. And I was like, what in the hell does that mean? You know? So when the gift giver made this post, and I was looking at it, I started thinking, like, we have a lot of information about fair folk. We have the map in the front, we have the list in the back. And if there's a way to make a column structure that points to a very, very specific, like, one fair folk per city, and if that's what we're missing, because I don't know, I don't want to bring up the back of the book like argument again, but there's a lot of stuff back there. Not a lot, but there's a couple of things back there that are really hard to deny. You know, like the Chicago World's Ferry, for instance.
Yeah.
And if there is like things that people have said in interviews before, things that taken at face value can't be true, but if you like apply it to the puzzle, it can, where they were like, we wanted one fair folk per state. You know, like they've said that in interviews. That obviously can't be true, given the number of the fair folk and what they're about and yada, yada, yada. But there can be one per puzzle, you know? And we've got this list of already completed fair folk from Sean and Ted. So if we were to be able to apply a specific fair folk to one puzzle, we can eliminate those and then focus on the others. And that's kind of what I was trying to do with my columns. And I really, like, I say all this just to say that I got nowhere. I couldn't figure it out. But that was like my immediate thing. Like, why would he say the one that like the specific fair folk? I'm done with my diatribe now. I don't know. Like, we've talked about that on Reddit. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, but nobody else has been able to come up with anything either.
Yeah, I guess, like, did he mean like the specific fair folk, or did he mean like the specific fair folk group?
Yeah, it's like he didn't explain. I mean, because you could just apply that to the painting, right? Like each painting had a thing. You know, like Chicago was the leprechaun. And for some reason, we know that leprechaun's important because in Rob's book, Byron signed it. What was it? The lair of the
leprechaun's lair or something. Yeah.
Or in Rob's book. Yeah. So it's like, what, I don't know what he meant, but then again, like Chris, you and I often talk about like this, just abundance of information that's unnecessary. Why give us this much information? Why give us lists for fair folk for certain regions if that's not important for in some way?
Uh-huh.
Somebody just asked if we've looked up the definition of gray. I don't remember if that part of our conversation was streamed.
What was I going to say?
Hi, Sunday.
Oh, yeah, Sunday's here.
Hey, guys.
We're talking about the lists of fair folk and the regions.
Because on the one hand, we know that the fair folk immigration story is important. We've got, at least for the three solved, we know that the Irish immigration, the Greek, and the Italian is tied to the general area in some way of where the dig site is.
But it's so loose. Like Chicago, really, like I get that they dye their river green, but there's no Irish.
No, the Chicago one is the Ulysses part, man. No one pays attention to that. It was Ulysses S. Grant, and Ulysses by James Joyce is the most famous Irish book ever written. So
maybe
I think you don't have to go any further than that. It's not a maybe. It's his name, and it's a famous book like that. Byron loved to read books. Like he was publisher of,
but
you know what I mean? Like,
but that doesn't make sense
Those
in the
would be
context of, because we've always put this into, like that region of this of what, like the Spanish are important to St. Augustine, right? But the Irish are not important at all to that park. So then, so if what you're saying is true, we would have to change the way we view the importance of immigration.
I think we should.
I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying it's hard.
Right? Like, because I don't think you need to go looking into like Grant's lineage to find his like grandmother once removed was Irish, or that you need to like stretch to try to find ways to prove the area.
Yeah.
The Irish is tied to, in that case, is tied to the park. The Greek cultural gardens, in that case, is tied to the park. The Italian one, it's in the North End, which is the Italian area. Okay. I don't know about, Cupolo or whatever, but how Italian can you tie to that particular park?
You have to consider also that, like, as a premise, how hard it is to make this work in 12 locations across a continent. So if he had that idea, maybe the first few cities had a super strong connection and a way of doing it, but then you have to fill out the other 12. Like, he's committed to 12, he's committed to these regions. It's like, I've got this theory working. So when you get down to the bottom of the list, you have to be potentially willing to stretch that a little bit. And that's, I would agree with Chris then, that the tie doesn't have to be, it's not going to be like the Greek cultural gardens necessarily, but there is some sort of a tie. And I think it's hard to argue that the ties to the three found aren't there. So we may just have to be a little bit more open to how they tie in the other 9.
Well, I'd say what we're talking about now works against the way the three of us specifically that are talking thinks the puzzle work. Because what we're saying right now is, okay, so what you have to do is take these concrete things that we know and just kind of make them loose, and they can mean whatever. Like, if that's that important to the puzzle, or if it's that important in the book, it should be that important to the puzzle. If immigration is just kind of loose now, what else do we make loose?
Well, the immigration tie isn't loose. How it ties can appear in different ways.
Okay,
like,
I see what you're saying.
If you're making a table, it's got month, gem, flower, fair folk, immigration. And it's like, okay, well, Cleveland is the Greek immigration. Is it helpful that it's in the Greek cultural gardens? Absolutely. Oh, we know Boston is Italian. Well, okay, if we're looking in Boston under Italian, where do we go? Well, let's go to the most common Italian neighborhood. Oh, now we're looking in the North End, and the Constitution is there. Like, it leads you to make those connections.
Hang on, let me look at something real quick.
It at least limits
Irish with Chicago. At like what you were saying earlier, George, about having multiple, before we started streaming live, but multiple connections that sort of work strengthened. So it may not be Dyeing the River Green on its own. It may not be Ulysses on its own, but the two together, it'd be really hard to argue against there being an Irish connection once we already know, because you can figure out that Chicago is the Irish puzzle ahead of time, right? Through connecting the Emerald and the Litany. So once you know, does it help you narrow down an area in Chicago if you know that it is the Irish puzzle?
I think it does.
I think it does.
Yeah.
I think it does. Just look at the opal puzzle, right? That was when Phoenix was like, I don't know, but maybe this like Dutch golden age of painters is what ties it to the Golden Square Mile. And me and Phil were like just making that connection alone was like, well, holy shit, then is that why it's Rembrandt? Like, is that what, all of these things kind of like tied in together, and also, granted, narrowed it right down and was like, bam, there's the leg eater. Like, it's, once you get there, it's hard to leave.
Yeah. I was just going to say, for people listening who, when we were talking about Chicago specifically, I remember it's like the Disabled Bridge or something. It's downtown Chicago. It's where everybody goes when you dye the river green, right? Like, that's the tourist spot. And it's like walking distance from the Chicago Water Tower. So when you were saying if you associate Irish with Chicago and you go to the most prominent Irish spot, you're going to be right there at the water tower where you can see it and go, holy shit, this puzzle is right here. Okay, so yes, that makes sense. Sorry.
Well, and this column talk, if you consider it, the if you make a table, right? There are blank spots in that table when you start this puzzle, right? How many of them have clocks? Well, they don't have clocks, but if you're doing what Gift Giver is saying and you're making a table of what do we know, you're going to end up with blank spots around your table. Oh, there's no clock here. There's no obvious month item. Well, we know down the road that, oh, maybe it's the 2 juggler balls. It doesn't matter because once you have the table and which columns and rows belong in it, you know what you're looking for. So having the multiple categories with fair folk, immigration, and how you piece this together, they just strengthen each other. There's no necessary linear way to do it, that it's always going to be like the immigration leads you to the park this way. It just could be a table. Like maybe Byron started by making a table.
Yeah.
And numbered it to 12 with the gems and then graded cities, and then some of them are harder to fill in, and some of them he probably didn't know until he went there. He's like, okay, here's my table. I got to find something Irish in Chicago. And
Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah, it's probably the other way around. It was like, I need somewhere that has something like specifically Irish, and like then got his way to figure out what city had the right area to tie into what he needed, because some are more obvious than others. Yes.
I'm wondering if we're all kind of in the consensus that we already know the columns.
I think for the most part, I'm still not convinced there's not things that we're either missing or we just haven't put the time into yet. Like for example, if we made, going back to my earlier point on, if you look at the different immigration stories on the front of the book and you break them down, like, yeah, he's giving you a story, but if you break out like the subject or is there anything unusual in that story or anything repetitive? Like if you treat each section like its own little, like a school paper that someone wrote, like, hey, what's the theme of this? What point are they trying to get across? If you look at the Greek, I'll use the Greek section specifically. It talks about the Hesperides, which, if anyone's familiar with that, has to do with, the gardens. So, I mean, right there in the section for immigration, for the Greek immigration in the front of the book, he's specifically giving you a clue that, hey, this, think about the garden related to the Greek puzzle. The difficult thing I have is like St. Augustine, for example, and the Outer Banks area. St. Augustine, obviously, like everything's Spanish. So like what's the how is the Spanish immigration helping us narrow down the specific location in St. Augustine? And then like it helps us find the city, but does it help us find the dig spot or the more specific location? I mean, and then same for with the Garnet puzzle. We have, of course, it's the English immigration, and of course, we have the lost colony and everything. But how exactly is that helping us narrow down to specific location? And then when you factor in the whole Wright brothers aspect of it as well, it kind of muddies the waters a little bit. I do think that the gift giver probably doesn't know. They probably don't have an understanding of the knowledge that we have of what we know so far of the secret. In fact, there's probably things that we know that they don't.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about that. I think it was off stream that I think we all kind of agree that the gift giver posts are not for hunters that have been doing this more than a few years. I do think
when.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The one thing that helped me with their post was, it's something that, we've talked about for, many years now, but it helps to reiterate sometimes, or be given a sign, I should say.
I'm gonna use that word.
Yeah, when he specifically mentioned the sign, it just kind of, brought back, just, past thoughts that, hey, they weren't necessarily saying keep it simple. I think they were saying more like some of these lines are just very direct. And, we have a tendency that if there's certain verse lines or things in the painting that if we don't find something that matches or if we don't find a solution, then we kind of get away from the direct stuff and we start becoming more and more creative to find something that matches. But based on their posts, I mean, it could be as simple as, a verse line's referring to a sign and we just haven't found that sign yet or the sign's no longer there.
Yeah.
I mean, we know, the New York City verse specifically says a sign nearby. Speaks of Vinny's natives, which most of us have taken that at face value for a while. But if it is, like, for example, if it's Hamilton, well, there's a hell of a lot of Hamilton sites in New York City. But I wonder what other verse lines and some of the other verses that could be referring to something that was there in person. You're in the park and you can see it. It's a sign. And we know based on the three solve puzzles that Byron, and even what JJP said, Byron would look and he would see, something on a building, or he would see, a plaque or words on a monument, and he would incorporate that to the verses. And I think sometimes we get away from that. I mean, it's very much integrated in the three solved puzzles. And, I personally think to find another task, it's just going to require someone to find that specific reference that we're missing that's long gone or lost, and finding that old picture from 1982 of something that's no longer there.
I mean, could you imagine how much like people would argue the words "the first chapter" if they didn't know it was like, oh, it's just written on that sign right there, you know?
That's a really good point.
Like, if we can't even solve all the lines in the solve puzzles,
yeah,
how on earth are we going to take the ones where we don't know the exact location and figure out every line?
Yeah.
There's no way. There are absolutely things that have disappeared in 40 years that there's no way to solve.
Yeah.
So
I think that could be a strength to this puzzle, though, like if you don't have to figure out every single line and you can just figure out that ending spot.
Well, I mean, you could jump ahead on really any puzzle, but the amount you can jump ahead means that the puzzle, like it means the puzzle is that much, it's just bad. It's bad. The puzzle's bad. If you can jump ahead that far, the puzzle's just bad.
Well, I guess what I mean is like you can figure out that the fence post in that back corner was the right spot, right?
Yeah.
But then you have to work the puzzle to figure out where the spot is in that back corner. I guess if that makes sense.
Yeah, but how many holes did they dig?
Yeah.
They still couldn't find it.
Luckily, they did dig in that one same spot, though. They were in that one area. They were concentrating in that one area. So
maybe that makes the puzzle good, though. Maybe it's because they give us so much information that we don't need all of it, right? Like Boston was solved, and Jason knew what like 3 lines meant, Yeah. And if you can solve that entire puzzle and only know what like 3 lines mean, maybe there's just an abundance of information, and then sometimes that abundance of information confuses people.
But we have to distinguish, this bugs me, we have to distinguish solve the puzzle from find the treasure.
That's
because
true.
you can find the treasure without solving any of the... Some guy could dig a hole in somewhere not even knowing about the secret and find a cask. That doesn't mean they solved. So when it says solved for those, I'm like, those are not solved. Those are partially solved. They are found.
In fairness, I don't think any of the 3 people or groups have solved their respective puzzles. But, whatever. They got the cask.
because it's a
Sure.
yeah. There are puzzles in it, but at the end of the day, it's a hunt. It's not a puzzle. It's not
Yeah.
something you can solve concretely
Yeah.
with math and have a solution. It's a bunch of hints.
Well, even case in point with Brian Zen and Andy, they had planned to dig in front of the wall, right? But then the wedding was there. And then so they had to dig behind the wall. And they dug all day.
Well, they weren't
then,
sure. They just knew it was in that park. They weren't sure
yeah.
where.
Yeah. And then, but then you say like Andy's sitting there on the stoop and he's looking around and he's like, Jesus, there's got to be something more to this thing. And he reads it again. And he's like, as the road curves, crap, if you're looking at this thing left or right as the road curves, then, let me go probe on this other side, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, he likes to say he solved that. I'd maintain he was bored.
I mean, if it took 6 hours to figure, to just go and try the other side, then
we have 3 found and 3 figured out, and in none of the 3 can we put a 1 foot square X on the ground.
No.
Which just like Byron is just giving you information and telling you to take a shovel and go dig it out.
Well, we can in Cleveland, but it completely contradicts the verse.
Yeah.
It's like it's on the opposite side.
Right. We know where the X is, but we don't know why that's the
We
X.
don't know why it's there.
Yeah.
Well, it just depends. I think it depends which way you were coming in. And that comes back to whether or not they were following the instructions in the correct way or something.
But that leads back to the puzzle being so damn vague that you don't know what the instructions are. I
don't know. I think there's a case to be made for perspective in the Cleveland, because you've got seek the columns, then you've got the wall is painted from the front. You've got, not that I'm saying that I would necessarily have figured it out on site, but you've got everything is painted from that one perspective. And then you get back to the back. And I mean, I don't know on a wall if you would necessarily think my left or your left, but on anything else, like, the Roanoke puzzle, you would think my left or your left, because it's a figure, and if you had like, hey, count from the left or whatever. But I think a fair case could be made for perspective in that one.
Going back to what we were talking about before, it was something Corey said. Like, I wonder if when we're going back to the immigration and stuff, I wonder if when we're making these lists, we're assuming certain things. Like, because of Boston, because of Cleveland, we're assuming the immigration tie directly relates to the dig spot, where it's fluid in Chicago, right? It's kind of iffy in Chicago. I wonder if we're putting too much emphasis, like if we make these columns, I wonder if we're putting too much emphasis on specific parts of the columns to give us specific information, where we need to take the column as a whole. Like the information, we're given the same amount of information, but we're given it different ways from different columns, and we're focusing too much on the specifics. Does that make sense?
I think JJP has maintained that in like all of the interviews that I've seen him do, is always like, there is a template, but that just means there's like some amount of information that you're given, but he also says that they evolved the puzzles as they were creating them. So that doesn't mean they're all that information is going to be given to you in the same way in each puzzle or each pairing, right?
Like, they all give you the city with latitude and longitude coordinates, but one doesn't. It gives it to you in a rebus. It gives you the same information, just not the same way.
It's a table to be filled out.
Yeah.
What about something like, just kind of building off the Graydon's earlier idea of like you're not going to find uniformly 12 cities that just fit this perfect idea, or 12 parks or 12 spots that, really strongly represent this idea. But what if in places where the immigration group is not as strongly referenced, like, like the Italian, like the north end of Boston is one of the oldest Italian city, like Little Italy's or whatever. But what if they use parts of the puzzle instead? What if, like in Milwaukee, where it's kind of like a lot of the puzzle has kind of could have heavy German ties or heavy references to famous composers or famous writers or something like that, that are German, instead of the actual city having a really strong German tie.
That Milwaukee has like huge German ties.
Yeah.
I made the mistake once of saying that it didn't. I was schooled real quick.
Oh,
it absolutely does. The one I was surprised you didn't bring up Houston, because that's
It has
the
nothing.
one that has the least, and that's where you find it in. It's either in the passage or it's in the vanishing.
yeah.
That it says they went to the like hot sands of the Southwest. Like that's where that nugget of information has to come, because I don't think there's as much.
I don't know. In Houston, like I feel like we definitely I mean, there's like a little Persia. There's like I found a document once that said during the 70s there was something called like there's these large waves of immigration, and during the 70s they called it the second wave, and it was coming from the Middle East, and but in large numbers they were turned away from Ellis Island, and so they would either they wouldn't even let the boats dock. They were just like, no, forget it. We've met our quotas. You're not coming in. And so these boats would then go down to like the Caribbean and try to come back in with like a different, hey, we came from the Caribbean, even though, they're the same people. But they came through Galveston, and Galveston then became the second largest immigration port during that time period. And then, I guess it's kind of a little bit looser, but the ties with oil, stuff like that, like I could see it.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. It is not as direct as the North End in Boston, right, or sure, even the like German connection. I think there are ties, and I think that's why he picked it. And you're right. I'm sure it all comes back to desert and oil and that kind of stuff. But I think it wasn't as maybe as immediately obvious. Maybe going back to Graydon's earlier point, is that like he was like, okay, well, I've got this ruby jewel. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
How am I going to tie it into this puzzle of places?
Yeah. Probably should be treated more like a Family Feud. Like if you asked 100 people in 1982, like when you think of the Middle East, what's the first thing you're going to think of? And so many of those 100 people are going to say oil, and then you ask those same 100 people, okay, what region or state in the U.S. are you going to think of when you come up with the word, when you say the word oil? They're going to say Texas, So I think, sometimes I think the 40 years hurts us as well with the kind of the cultural,
Sunday, where did the Oilers play?
Yeah, that's true.
Edmonton.
Where did the real Oilers play?
Yeah, no, downtown in what was it? Geez, I'm gonna get my Texan card revoked for not.
But it was in Houston, like, right? Like
yeah,
I could buy that connection. I could buy that.
Yeah.
But we can't get too bogged down in like this table that we're talking about. It doesn't give us the dig spot.
No.
Right? It's pre-work. What gives you the dig spot? The verse and the painting.
Yeah.
So all this table pre-work is just getting you warm. No, warmer. Oh, you're getting warmer. Oh, okay, you found the city. Oh, okay, you found the neighborhood. Oh, okay, sure. Now read the verse.
Yeah, but imagine we could get 15,000 people to all agree on the stuff that you just said.
Yeah.
I think a lot more casts would come out of the ground.
Well, I think about some
all those people to find old photos. That's the only way we're going to do this. We need people to find video and photos from the places where we know they are from 1982 until we find that sign that says the thing that's like the eureka from the verse, and we go, oh,
absolutely,
agreed.
I think about what you said earlier and what was just talked about, and Robert Fox is in the comments, so I'm going to big up him a little bit. So Robert Fox makes this chart, right? Like all of these paintings have latitude and longitude coordinates except this one, right? So he has columns, and he realizes he needs to look for something that gives him a city, right? That fills out a column. What if there is something in these paintings or these verses that gives us that level of information, right? Something that we're missing with that level of information. But because, like you were saying, some of the columns aren't filled, we don't see the pattern, right? Like six of these paintings have X, the other 6 don't. When they actually have X, it's just in a different format, and we don't know to look for it. And it gives us
the verse.
and it gives us the same level of information that the latitude and longitude coordinates give us. Like, we assume that this puzzle doesn't give us an area of a city in a lot of these. What if that's not true? What if we just haven't found that level of information yet?
You don't think stuff like stuff that we've already all talked about, like the ruffle of the sleeve in New Orleans being that turn of the Mississippi River, like stuff like that. Oh, George, no.
But that's not, like, interpretive stuff isn't really what I'm talking about. It's information that's given, right? Like,
okay.
Like say, for instance, there is something in the book that gives you an area of a city, like in the litany in St. Augustine, right? We were talking about St. Augustine as 100% a Spanish city. You could throw a rock and hit something Spanish. But in the front of the book, it calls out the Fountain of Youth, right?
And maybe that's why.
And the vanishing.
Yeah. So what if there is something like that in the verses and the paintings in the front of the book that's very, very direct, but it's given to you in very different ways? And because we haven't laid out this column of stuff, or these columns of things or whatever, we're just missing this pattern. But on the other hand, like, how do you look for a pattern you don't know exists?
Yeah.
You just have to collect information. You have to, like, mind map it. That's really the way to do it.
Yeah, but I don't want to put this whole book in an Excel document. And that's basically what you would have to do, right? Like, you would have to.
I don't know that it has to be at that level. It could be just a column, like the gift giver is saying. Maybe we're just missing a column, or we're missing. What brings me back all the time to trying to do this is still the fact that we haven't figured out how to match the verses with the paintings in a perfect way.
I still think that's a column. I still think that's a column thing, right?
Yeah,
like, you have information given from the verse, you have information given from the city, or from the painting. One of those is going to give you a city. There's maps in certain paintings. There's outlines of states. There's outlines of cities. There's, very direct stuff. And then in some paintings there aren't, but there's very descriptive verses, and there's something in one of each of those that'll give you the city, and that ties those two things together. It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be a connection from 1 to 2 that we haven't found yet, or from 1 to 3 that we haven't found yet. It could be a connection from 1 to 2 and from 2 to 3. And we're missing the 2.
We know the order of the things in the book are important as well, but we haven't figured out.
We haven't figured out why.
We do?
Well, the bookends thing.
That's a good point.
Okay.
The verses, we have to be careful, though, because it's easy to interpret those lines to mean absolutely anything you want. It has to be objective. Like in verse 2, that quote is exact and talking about New Orleans, and that is undeniable. It's not like, oh, well, I think it's talking, it's about the French Quarter, but it's like, no, that is, you could not deny that's that quote, and it is referencing a place in New Orleans, period. Right. So like that level is fine. But like, if you wanted to say like, oh, well, Stonewall's door, it's like this, like, stone wall over here, of course it's in this city. Like, there's a fine line you have to tread when
but there's that level
calling out verse a priority.
There's that level of strength connection, though, in places like Houston, though, that you would never know unless you're already standing in the park, right? You can't deny 982 and Herman Melville quote, but how does that help you match them ahead of time? It doesn't. You already have to be there to realize that it matches.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read the Herman Melville quote, it does, because it's talking about a leaf, and guess what's a leaf in the painting? The larkspur. Oh, there you go. It worked. That works, but not the Melville part, the quote itself.
I don't know. I did a lot. Like I looked in the front of the book. Like I spent like 3 months working on the front of the book because I really thought, hey, the way to pair is going to be up there. And I made all these lists, all these numbers. Like I numbered stuff, like each list of the jewels every time they're listed. Hey, the ruby was the second one. It was the on the map, it's the eighth one listed. On in the painting, it's the, whatever one listed. It's this, that. And just to see if maybe they brought you somewhere, or maybe even the words. Like I for a while I thought duplicate words were really gonna do it, because a lot of words are show up a lot, and so I thought, well, maybe that was going to be it. And like right after the fair folk, like a description after the fair folk was going to be somewhere, but none of it really panned out. And then I realized, like, there's all this stuff for location. There's like the zip code, or not the zip code, but there's like the latitude, longitude. There's these sort of map things. There's these iconic buildings. There's statues, all this stuff. So there's like a whole lot of stuff for like location. Or there's like the famous poem in Boston with Paul Revere, like that kind of stuff. And I was like, I wonder if I kind of came at the end I wonder if we were supposed to recognize the latitude, longitude, and then that's our painting, right? So if I'm in Houston, then I know that that's my Houston painting, and I go out and I explore the parks, and then I see this plaque that says 982, and I'm like, oh, okay, here I am. Let me start following these clues. Kind of like what the guys in Cleveland did, not Cleveland, in Chicago, with the street names.
Sunday does have a good point. Like, why go to, if you're going to have the latitude and longitude in the painting, why go to all the trouble of using the immigration and all the other information and try to get you to the city?
Well, if you have the latitude and longitude for Houston and you look at the verse and you find the Herman Melville quote, the park. Mm-hmm. You've been given the park. Like, if you sit and look at it and like, why is Herman Melville? Oh, the biggest park in my city is Herman Park. Okay. Yeah.
Plus, if you look at that painting, you look at a trail map, in the park for Herman Park, you see this thing that looks like this giant pillar with a ball. There's two of them. I don't know if you like the one out in the park, you like the one in the zoo. Either way, there's two of them. One's bigger, one's smaller, but you see that on the trail map, on the zoo map, on that kind of stuff. You're like, oh, wait a second. I already have this zip code, or this latitude, longitude. I've got this biggest thing in the painting that looks like this thing. Let me follow these clues here in this park.
But then that works directly against this being an armchair treasure hunt. Because what you're suggesting is that I use the image to find the city, and then I go to the city and I brute force the verses based on what I see. And
I don't disagree.
And that might be true, but that would say that then this was not in fact an armchair treasure hunt.
But in reality, is there anyone in this chat, this group here, that thinks this is an armchair treasure hunt?
I think maybe Byron thought it was an armchair treasure hunt.
I don't know, man. There's too much. I don't know. I think for book sales, he said it was an armchair treasure hunt. For book sales, he can anybody can drive there in an afternoon and just pick one up.
Exactly. With latitude, longitude, I think that they're not, if you told someone who didn't know about this right now, okay, there are latitude, longitude numbers in these 12 paintings, find them. They could come up with 100 different numbers. Oh, sure. They're not debatable because we know that they're true, but they're very obscure. And there are lots of things in those paintings that look like numbers that clearly aren't numbers. So I don't think it's as easy as saying, well, if the latitude, longitudes are in there, why do we need everything else? Because you would almost need to construct your table to convince. It's like a confirmation. It's like, oh, I think this is Chicago. So what's the latitude, longitude of Chicago? Oh, so if I look at these now, oh yeah, there they are. Okay, I'm right.
Yeah.
All of these table items just confirm each other. They're not so obvious that you could take any of them individually and just jump all the other steps. You need to build your table.
Chicago specifically, if I didn't see, I try to find the latitude, longitude coordinates in the Chicago painting, without looking to see someone else where they've marked up the the picture. And I couldn't figure out the numbers. Like I didn't even look up I didn't even use the internet to see what the number, the latitude longitude was for Chicago or anything. I tried to like figure it out on my own. I couldn't do it. I had to go and like even when I looked up what the latitude and longitude is for Chicago, I still couldn't make out the numbers. I had to find where someone else like marked it up on their phone or whatever for me to see it. Now there are some like Houston, I think, the Houston pane I think is pretty clear. The numbers are pretty clear. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But we've talked a lot about the front of the book, but if we just for a few minutes specifically talk about the verses. So if we just look at the verses and, if we look at columns and similarities and stuff, if we see anything, throughout the 12 verses that, any patterns, and obviously, some of the verses have numbers, etc., which I've spent countless hours trying to figure those numbers out, being an engineer, and I've never been able to come up with anything, but months, a few of the verses specifically call out months, which I don't know exactly what Byron was going for there because it confuses me because, like, for example, the January puzzle calls out December, July, and August. And then you have the Houston, the July puzzle, it calls out December. So I don't know if maybe he was just using the word, using months to try to get us to, like, if you just picked up the book and you knew nothing about the secret, maybe he was just putting months in the verse to try to get you to start thinking about months in order for you to make the connections with the litany and the gems and the immigration groups and everything. That's just one idea, but what are some other similarities that you guys see throughout the 12 verses as a whole?
I mean, I have a chart for that. Go ahead, Sunday.
Oh, I have one. You guys are gonna think it's crazy because I think it's kind of crazy too. But I was I was convinced that the front of the book has to have a way to pair these verses. Like there has to be a way. And like you just said, there's so many numbers in the verses and they're different ways. They're given, some of them are given in the numerals, some of them are spelled out, some of them are given in months, some of them are given like couplet, twin, like all those kinds of things. Like not twin, but that's a different but and I thought, well, maybe. So first I came up with a pretty convoluted way and I was like, okay, so if it's a bigger number, you add it. If it's a smaller number, you subtract it, whatever. But then I just decided how would you even know to do that? But if you just add up the numbers in the verses and it gives you either the image number, the month number, the painting number or the month number. And some of them give you the painting number, some of them give you the month number. So I don't know if that was meant to maybe like be another part of the puzzle or what, but it's kind of interesting the way it works out because say if you're working on a 12, like 12 is your base number. So if you get larger than a 12, then you add those numbers together. Like a 13 would become a 4, which is kind of stretchy. I feel like that's the stretchy part. But so you add up all these numbers, you get to the end, and then you reduce it to a number that's using numerology, which I feel like was a little less cheesy in 1981 than it is right now. But yeah, so you get either the month number or the painting number. So maybe, I mean, that does take you down from 12 possibilities to 2 possibilities that you have to try to figure out. Now, whether that's an intended method, there's all kinds of different ways. Like some of them do you just use, I don't know. I can post it, but there's a couple of ways.
I just don't understand how anyone would get to that as a method.
Yeah.
Like that was concocted in your mind.
Yes.
Right. Like I think, and I worry that is what the gift giver was talking about when they said, are you working on Byron's puzzle or are you working on your own puzzle?
I don't disagree because I was looking for a specific answer. Yeah. So I was looking for, hey, can I get these answers? But I did use Byron's numbers, and I don't, there is, I forget what it's called. It's not just numerology, but there is a uh maybe it is just numerology. But yeah, I agree. Like I was looking for a specific answer. Yeah.
Um, just a few things to just put out there. I made this table a while back of reoccurrences in the verse, and there are some interesting potentially coincidences, but um, 6 of the verses mention colors. 6 of the verses use the word step. 5 of the verses mention day or night. 7 of the verses mention either north, south, east, or west. And there's more in here too, but that's a lot of occurrences of those things, and it could totally be coincidence. But I'm sure there's people out there who have done more extensive breakdown of that than I have. But
Well, there's weird stuff like that in the paintings too. Like 4 of the paintings are at night, 4 of the paintings are during the day, 4 of the paintings are arguably inside. Like they just have no connection whatsoever. But if we're making day night columns, there should be a way to figure that out.
Yeah, and like Chicago and Montreal, I mean, they're both portraits, but what's the connection between those two? Those two puzzles? I don't know, or and if there are pairs, does that mean that those two puzzles are pairs because those paintings are portraits? And a lot of people have made the same argument for the Boston and the Roanoke painting because of the windows behind the fair folk. But once again, we're kind of assuming the pair is a thing. We've never really been told the pair is an actual thing or it's important. I know JGP said bookends, but that doesn't necessarily mean pairs. And there's similar words used throughout the verses as well. I mean, that could be as simple as just Byron, just using his own terminology consistently, but there could be some hints there if he's using the same word throughout. Sometimes it seems like he's, once again, this is kind of my personal belief, but I do think bridges are involved in a few of the puzzles, and it seems like he is using very similar words to describe a bridge. And then with the numbers, why are some of them written out as actual digits and some of them are written out in word form? I know that drives me crazy. Can't figure it out. Milwaukee specifically, the majority of the numbers in that verse are actual numbers, not spelled out. But and then one thing that I've spent some time on is when Byron I try to always put myself in the mind of Byron when he was actually writing these verses. Like, why did he choose the specific, like line numbers for, like just to describe the dig spot, because it's not always at the very end. So like what was his thought process of, oh, I'm going to have the dig spot, the 9th line down out of, 12 lines or whatever, and then completely do something different in another verse. And, I tried to spend some time working on the 3 solid ones to see if I could decode whatever he was doing there. That way I could, apply that to some of the other verses and figure out which specific lines were dig spots. But much like everything else I've tried to do in the secret, I haven't been able to figure it out.
So I think the point of this stream is we don't know.
Right.
But so going back to the whole purpose of the stream, talking about the Discover's most recent post, at the very beginning, he or she, I guess I could, he or she, they mentioned a few. They specifically said iconic. There were some iconic things that happened in 1982, some iconic things that came out in 1982. And they specifically, they gave some examples. Was E.T. was an example. They
Thriller.
Yeah, so but if you take those first two lines out of the post, like he didn't need to mention those two first lines. They were completely unnecessary for the rest of that post. So why did he specifically mention, hey, there were some iconic things that came out in 1982? It just didn't seem like it had anything to do with the point he was trying to get across. So, there's been some speculation in the past that some iconic things that came out in the early 80s may have influenced Byron and JGP and others in creating the puzzle. Indiana Jones is brought up a lot, but I wonder if that could have been a potential, hint that, Byron may have used something, a movie or book or something that was really iconic in the early 80s or late 70s to help kind of, at least, maybe not craft the puzzle, but, heavily inspired him to and how he constructed the puzzle.
I don't know. I had to go back and read that post. And what I got with that was just putting you in a frame of reference. Like I see so many people who are online and are like, oh, you could have done this in the 80s. You could have taken a map and made an overlay of this image or whatever and overlay that. But what I see there is like, look, we barely had Pitfall. Okay. Like, we had a Polaroid and that was it. Yeah. Like Photoshop was 10 years away. That's what I see. I see it as a frame to just put you back in that time.
And they specifically mentioned, if you're looking at the paintings, they said, look at the big picture stuff that we already know. We know of the, the fence and fixture. We know of the terminal tower. We know of, home plate. Those are not, they're hidden, in a clever way, but they're not something that, you have to zoom in on or anything. But I'm just wondering if there's like home plate, for example, even after Boston was found, we had no idea, even Jason didn't know that was there. JGP had to point it out to everyone. So, I mean, if you didn't do that on expedition, then we probably still didn't know. We probably still wouldn't know there was a home plate in the Boston image. So I'm just curious if there's some other very blatant, cleverly hidden thing that is just staring us in the face. It's not tiny, it's not small, it's just some use of negative space or something that's just very cleverly hidden in the paint. Like, going back to like the terminal tower and water tower, this is assuming that all the paintings work the same, which we don't know that. But like the San Francisco painting, there's still no really agreement upon the community of what like the main, if there is a landmark in each painting, there's not an agreement upon what that landmark is. And I'm just using the San Francisco puzzle.
You don't think it's Golden Gate Park is just the landmark?
A big giant rectangle?
I'm just saying there's not an agreement upon the community.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I don't think that,
It's a big giant rectangle.
Or even why it would be Golden Gate Park if you feel like it's in Chinatown. You know what I mean? Or something like that. Yeah.
I wonder if this column thing, if we're making it and Gift Giver made it really too complicated for people and an easy sort of, because I'm lazy and I like to find the easy way to do things. The easy, quick way to do this would be to take the two puzzles we know the most about, which is Chicago and Cleveland, and go through the book and find everything that could relate to those two puzzles, and then see and fill out two columns, right? Like two rows of columns one for each of those puzzles, and see what information is the same, right? And then start going and looking for that for the rest of the puzzles. So instead of trying to find a pattern of things that we don't know we should be looking for, go and find all the things that we know relate, and then create rows that way. That might be the lazy way to do it.
Yeah, it's the same thing with looking at the front of the book, or if someone's interested in the back of the book, take the three solid ones, and if you do come up with any type of method, try to apply it to those three first. if it works for all three or even one of them, then yeah, definitely try to use that throughout the others and see what you come up with.
I think that's something that people miss, and it's important with the gift giver post. There was a method, right? Like you have to. This puzzle has to give you specific information. It doesn't necessarily have to give you to you the same way, right? So people just troll through this book looking for any little connections they can make, but can can the information that you received be applied to other puzzles as well? Does that make sense? Like they can't all be wholly different. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't help but think of Boston because there was, so many people that were just completely off track on the Boston puzzle before it was found, and obviously puzzles make more sense after the fact, but I mean the painting does lead you to the north end of the city. I'm just, there's probably similar things in the other paintings that were just misinterpreting or.
In retrospect with Boston, any old hunter just has to say like we were just wrong. We were focused on the wrong stuff because all of the stuff in retrospect or in hindsight with Boston is just staring you in the face. The zip code, North End, the North Star,
home plate,
Ironsides, home plate, like it's all staring you in the face. Even the stupid stuff like the Boston Globe and the Boston like it. These like we focused on the wrong things and ended up on the wrong area. Just wrong.
Yeah, I think the issue, two of the biggest issues with The Secret is all of the preconceived notions. It's no one's to blame. It's just when you get involved in something and you hear discussions and you hear people's opinions, you just can't help but start thinking in a similar way. But the second issue is just, going back to what Green was saying earlier, it's just going to take a massive group effort to spend countless hours and hours and hours trying to find pictures and videos of these areas in the early 80s and some specific sign or building or something that's not there anymore. And like New York City, for example, I mean, I don't know if it'll ever be found just because of the amount of, it's so massive and then just the amount of changes that have happened. But even a small place like St. Augustine, we can.
I don't know. I think sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I could, if I had $1 billion and I took the rest of my life and hired a bunch of people to just spend all their time researching the internet, they still may not find the specific. There may not be a picture or video of a certain area in the early 80s, at least not online.
I think back in the day, our biggest problem was once these started getting solved, we were like, okay, they're all solved the same way. They're all this weird path. They're all going to lead you to this one obscure thing in the image, which is going to be right where you're going to dig. And that's where people got screwed up in Boston. We were like, we already know this is Boston. We've got the Charles Gate stupid planner that everybody thinks is a match. And in hindsight, really isn't that much of a match. And they all just focus on that when in reality, it is coming. The more we learn about the puzzle, the more we do realize that it's not that there's one path for every puzzle. There's certain information and you get that information and then you apply that information.
I think that sums up the gift giver nudge.
Yeah.
I think that's what the columns are. The table is the consistent things that we know. So maybe we've solved it. Maybe the puzzle is all solved. And the only things left are things that are just were a sign, that are in the verse, that are gone.
So before we went live, Graydon, you talked about, does the gift givers post give credence to the Japanese hints?
Yeah.
We haven't talked about this since we went live, and I think the audience would probably love to hear some of that discussion that we're having on that topic.
Oh God.
Open up a can of worms. He said Japanese hints. He didn't say back of the book.
No, you weren't here for that conversation.
Oh, uh-oh.
It is a very it is a very specific thing for him to know, or them to know, and to bring up for someone who just checks in once a year and really didn't have anything to do with the creation of this puzzle. They were just in a compartmentalized silo and did what Byron asked them to do. It's pretty specific.
I mean, in fairness, we don't know that. We just know that the people that were on the cover of this book were compartmentalized. We don't know of anybody else.
Sure.
Because, like I've said all along, two names. One you would probably know, one you will not know. And you have no idea what that person did. You know what I'm saying?
Which is exciting, I think.
And it seems like everyone got a copy of the Japanese book. Like the more, like on all the podcasts and interviews and everything, they always mention, oh, they had a copy of the Japanese edition, right? Like, I think everyone involved or in whatever inner circle existed probably at least got a copy of the Japanese version and saw the hint.
But to be fair, John didn't know there were hints.
He just never opened it.
Does it say?
Put it right on the shelf.
Like, does it say in English?
Do you think the others
hints?
did?
I don't know.
You'd have to go quite a ways to compare the two books together and read through it and be like, oh, there's hints in here.
I mean, like the hints. The hints are in Japanese. Yeah, they're all in Japanese. Oh, no, it says very, very clearly in English, postscript and the hints.
Hints, yeah.
So maybe they just didn't care enough to look. Like, I mean, I get that from everybody that's worked on this book. Like, my job was over. I don't care.
Yeah, they just put it aside.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it was something nice that Byron sent them. And like, hey, here's the cast. Here's the, a year later, here's a copy of the Japanese book.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of people mention that, well, if they were, if Byron and JJP were working in the silo, then how would this other person know anything? I have a scenario. It's speculation. Speculation is my favorite thing. Even non-secret stuff, I love to speculate. So let's say that you're one of the numerous people involved in the book, whether we know them or not. And, the book, we all know it wasn't very successful when it came out. Let's fast forward in time. Let's say it's the mid 1990s and you were involved in the secret, but you always had interest in it. You still work with Byron occasionally on different projects. Who's to say that they didn't talk about it? Like, hey, you remember that project we worked on, the secret? Like, hey, where'd you bury those things? Like, what was the, like, where was this? Where was, what park, what city was this? Like, I just think, like, if I was involved with the book, even if I was doing something completely unrelated to the puzzle, I'd be interested to know, if I was involved in this treasure hunt book, I'd be interested to know where these things were at. And if the book wasn't successful, then who's to say 10, 15 years later, I wouldn't, like, if Byron was my friend, why wouldn't I talk to him about, like, hey, that book we worked on, like, there's nothing to hide anymore. No one's interested in this, or very few people are interested in it. Who's to say that Byron didn't tell people or talk to them or tell them what, versus meant or where the cast were located.
I mean, it's
just speculation.
It's a good example, though.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
Like
very easy to say, like, oh, did anyone ever find one of those things?
Yeah.
Like, that's a great
how the hell did that work?
Open the conversation.
At that point, it would have been like, well, one of them.
That's when Byron reached into his coat pocket and was like, oh, hey, here's all the answers. Here you go. And he gave it to that person, and they still have it with all the solutions.
Now we know what happened to them.
I don't know.
And, so once again, I love speculation. So we know Sandy did find the gems. Is that right, George?
Yeah.
She did. So who's, once again, this is all speculation. Who's to say she didn't find the solutions as well?
Notebook.
And that inner circle of creators, she could have given the solutions to them, and they decided to hold on to them to honor, Byron's memory and the memory of the hunt. It's just, once again, speculation, but
yeah.
I'm just thinking of ways that someone may know the some of the locations or answers for solutions without them being involved in the hunt early on. And plus, I like to have hope that the solutions still exist and they're out there.
Robert Fox is very active in the comments. I've been desperately trying to get him to come on one of these for years.
Good, Robert.
Maybe now he will. There's actually 2 people in the comments, and both of them I've tried to get on this thing for years, and maybe I can get them together. Robert Fox and Eric. Eric's here from Quest for Treasure.
Why are you on here? Come on.
Yeah, I've been desperately trying to get those 2 people to talk. Maybe what I want to do is get like them and Matt, and maybe a couple of other old screen names where people don't know their actual names, and get them together to just talk about what it was like in like 2002 or whatever, you know?
Yeah. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I adore Matt. I miss him.
Eric's like, shh. Yes, that's the name of the show. Thank you.
Robert says one day, my friend.
Yeah.
Today, Robert.
Today is the day.
Yeah, George will kick all of the rest of us out if you want.
I totally will. I'll sit here for like 6 hours and just... So what was it like when you didn't have a computer?
They got more done.
So do we have a path forward now with columns at all? I mean, like what after is there anything that was said here that's going to make you... Let me ask this to Chris, because Chris, you have the most famous columns.
The most columns.
Is there anything that you would add or subtract from your current columns? Because those, dude, they're really good. But when we're going back to something we were saying before, it does seem like some of the stuff was kind of forced in. Do you think maybe that there's information that you were missing that would have filled in those blanks, or is there anything that's going to change?
I think what you said about like revisiting the 3 that have been solved, and really for me trying to look like more widely, I guess, at it and see what the gaps were, and try to find if there are ways that it was solved, if not just from the connection to the gem itself, but if there is something in the front of the book or the back of the book or otherwise that can fill in those gaps. I think that's narrowing the scope and trying to do it with things that we already at least know that end point to might be worthwhile.
Someone asked who is snoring. That is my dog. It's right there.
Aww.
Ryder, stop snoring.
Ryder.
It's like, no. Sorry. You have to deal with my dog snoring.
I want to hear examples of you guys' column headings. Like, what are you including in this? I mean, obviously, like, well, go ahead. Never mind.
I got a lot of shit. That's my problem.
Graydon, what are your... Oh, no. Corey, George, what are your column headings?
I mean, so I removed and added, like I didn't have a whole lot of, because I do so much stuff. I didn't have a whole lot of time to look at this, but what I was looking at was like very, very vague, broad stuff. Like I had latitude and longitude coordinates, I had months, I had gems, I had all the normal stuff, but then I also started looking at the paintings and like which ones had day settings, which ones were interior settings, which ones were exterior settings, which ones had X, Y, or Z within the painting, which ones had a figure, which ones like not necessarily a fairy, but which ones had a prominent fairy, which ones had a figure, which ones had no figure, like New Orleans, for instance. There's a dude in the clock, but there's not really a figure. Does that make sense? There's an arm.
Yeah.
So I started looking at stuff like that, and I got nowhere. Like I was able to make patterns out of things, but it didn't lead anywhere. It didn't tell me anything I didn't already know.
Well, it doesn't mean it didn't lead anywhere.
That's true, I guess.
That just means it didn't tell you anything you already didn't know. I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree.
think one thing we haven't talked about is there does seem to be, whether it's painting or from the book, there seems to be references to um, fairy tales, like fairy tales specific to immigration groups, um, as well as famous classic stories. Of course, Wizard of Oz is the one most of us immediately think of, and um, you know, right, similar to what George said, I've found many patterns, but I haven't been able to figure out the exactly what. Some of them I think I know the reasoning, but it typically only helps me with either making connections that we already know of or getting to a region or a city, but not necessarily. I've never been able to find a pattern of anything that's helped me get to like a certain area in a city. Um,
I think you guys both hit on something really important where you both said, well, it might not have given you something that we didn't already know. But I think a lot of people kind of get there and they're like, well, we already know that, so it's useless or whatever. But I think you're right. You guys, we have to think of these puzzles from beginning to end. And if you can figure out something that teaches you how the puzzle works in the beginning, then you've got a piece of the framework, you know? So even if it is something that we already know, you're gaining a pattern, you're gaining insight into how they're thinking, how they're building the puzzle. So it's still valuable.
Before this,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just say, like, before the stream today, for the amount of thousands of hours I've spent on this, I was like, do I actually know how to build the simple table with 5 columns in it? Can I actually go back and construct and connect all the gems with the months with the flower? Do I actually know, if I had just the book in 1982, how I would put these cities together? And I could do it, but I really had to think about it. And I think what you're suggesting, what you're all kind of suggesting, is very important. I would encourage anyone, whether you have been doing this for forever or just getting started, go follow the gift giver's advice. Go back to the beginning and build your table. Like, get rid of everything you know and go back to the start.
Yeah.
And see, can you actually do that? Because we know so many things about this hunt that we have got secondhand, that have been from other people, and I think there's a lot of value in going back and going to the beginning and seeing, can you actually approach this as a puzzle from the start?
So I have a question, because both you and Sunday both said approach the puzzle, but there's like a mindset problem here, right? Like you have to approach the secret with it's different if you approach it with a different mindset, right? Like if you approach a puzzle is, I don't know, like a complicated thing where you have to figure out the answer. But a treasure hunt gives you the answer, you just have to find it, right? Like if
the secret is both.
It is kind of
the verse painting thing is a puzzle, but then once you've got the pairing, is a treasure hunt.
Yeah. What do you not think that so like, let's say the columns wouldn't necessarily be a puzzle, right? You're looking for information that the book is giving you, right? Like you shouldn't have to leave the book to get that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And like, that's where I always see people get tripped up. They're like, they approach the fundamentals or the beginning of the secret as if it's the masquerade, and it's not. It's a hunt for specific information hidden specific ways.
I don't know. I think I see a world where the verse pairings thing is a puzzle that we haven't cracked. Like I want to believe that there is some logical, incontrovertible proof within the book that tells you which painting goes with which verse.
Mm-hmm. Well,
once you've done that, you now have this paired thing. Then it's almost like it's a different game.
Yeah. I think we're saying the same things in different ways. I just don't think that puzzle for figuring it out is complicated. I think it's just obscure. Like the information's obscurely hidden. I don't think it's I don't think there's a complicated method to extract that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think we're just either we're missing it or the instructions are sufficiently vague,
Or it's not there,
or
which
it's not there.
would suck.
I don't know, because there's some stuff like when you guys were talking, I started thinking about the two treasure poems. Like they are probably the two things that get used the least or referenced the least or posted about the least. Like they fly under the radar, but they're truly the closest things that we have to like information surrounding the puzzle part of it, the paintings and the verses that we also know the least like we know the least objective information about.
You're talking about the verses themselves?
No, the treasure poem, the
Oh, and
two
yeah.
poems
I got you.
on that sort of bookend the bookended paintings. You know,
I
they're also in arches, whatever all that arch stuff
That's
means.
that's the front and the back of the book.
But when we were talking about columns, I was like, well, why are we matching 12 verses with the site of paintings 12 in color light? Because like, I don't know, Braden or someone mentioned like colors, and I was like, well, shit, is it like color and light? Like what are we maybe missing? Because Corey was talking about sweet earlier, but shining is probably the most repeated word through the front of the book, through the verses. That just comes up over and over again. Shining is like a representation of light, right? Bright comes up a lot. When you look at the litany, you've got both colors and light references. The bright harvest of the midnight rock and the purple amethyst, and like you've there's all this information. So when we're talking about columns, that was something just that occurred to me to probably dig a little bit deeper into and see if is there information that could help us limit art. So it also came from Graydon talking about like the minimum, like some minimum set of columns. Like can we limit it to not the entire world of categories, but to some subset of categories that we're given to?
I'm expecting now that we've put all of this in your head that sometime in the next couple of weeks we're going to get a very long blog post that's just an Excel spreadsheet of Chicago and Cleveland.
It's possible somehow. Like it ebbs and flows. Like I think I posted like 2 times in 2023.
Well, you took a break, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, I just like
I feel like everybody in 2023 took a break.
Yeah. You get burnt out. It's like this fatigue of like always being wrong, which it's like I don't care about it. My ego is not tied to this fucking stupid book, but just going on and pushing and trying to figure it out and what about this and what about that, and you just get to a point where like, oh, I'm like tired of failing. I need to just like do something else with my life. But I don't know. It was funny.
Someone just the gift a different hunt called the Anniversary Hunt, which was exciting at first, but now has me feeling the same way.
That's how it happens. You just like go between them. But the gift giver, I think, is what sort of rejuvenates that, because like, you know, I got messages from multiple people as soon as have you seen the gift giver post? And I was like, oh shit, maybe I should look at the group again. And then you get sucked in, and I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I've been thinking about this thing. Maybe I'll actually like sit down and write it up. And then you make a post, and then you like deal with the comments for like a day. My wife was like, get off your phone, it's Christmas. And I was like, yeah, but I
said it. But a guy named Gary wants to argue with me.
Yeah. I know. So
guy named Gary that I don't know wants to argue.
This sort of thing though helps because yes, on one side I would give anything to find one more of these, and on the other side I'm not sure that any of them are findable. But you can go crazy on your own on your phone. But this never gets old. So like people like get together more. Get like even if there's 2 of you, Go online and just chat, like work off each other, because then at very least you're getting human interaction, you're getting to build relationships with people, and it's a lot more fun to bounce ideas off each other. So
that's something I'll give like Tim, Sunday, even Corey and Evie and the anniversary hunt credit for. Like they'll go on a live stream and just talk for like 8 hours. And they don't have a show, they don't have an agenda, they just chat, and people have so much fun, you know?
Yeah, it is fun.
Whether they accomplish anything
for that long, but we always end up doing it.
Yeah, we specifically like plan like, okay, we're not going to go very long. Maybe just like
2 hours tonight, guys. No matter what, we're capping.
6 hours later, we're still talking.
You guys should.
I'm already an hour after when I said I had to leave.
Do you need to leave? We'll let you leave.
I think I need to leave now. But
I mean, I think we're pretty much done. Yeah. All right. Well, cool.
Okay, I have one last thing about the color light idea. I had this idea a long time ago, but a lot of the paintings or a lot of the illustrations and even the pictures in the back of the book are black and white. So maybe the color light was telling us we need to just focus on the paintings. Now I know some of the pictures in the back of the book are in color. But what if it's telling us, hey, you guys, you get this book full of pictures, full of illustrations, but you need to wed this verse with one of these paintings that's in color in this section, maybe. I don't know. That was
Yeah. Now, how do we do that? Let's make some columns.
Yeah, exactly.
So you know how you get in an argument with someone on Facebook and they're like, well, you've never found a cask. So that's like the end of the argument.
Well,
okay. Well, I have a cask now, so
nice.
That's nice.
My friend Dustin modeled this and 3D printed it, but I'm not sure if you can see the details.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's the Boston,
the Boston.
Yeah, I love it.
It even has the little handle on it, and it had on the top. He modeled it. You probably won't be able to see it, but it has the home plate and
that's
really
cool.
That's fun.
That is too cool.
That's something like this community's went crazy with this year is like creative making of things. Like it used to just be Arthur. Arthur would make stuff and he would send it out, but now it's like everybody's 3D printing cool stuff or painting cool stuff or it's
and gift giving.
Yeah,
yes,
it's good creative outlet.
Other stuff.
I'm going to try to start a tradition. So Sunday was nice enough to send me a Christmas ornament that Arthur made. It's of the mask in the Charleston painting, and I thought it'd be cool if like I wrote the initials on the back of everyone who's had it, and then next year I sent it out to someone to hang on their Christmas tree, and then I'll ask them to do the same, send it to someone, and it just goes around the community.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, since you were showing off your cask, I wanted to show off mine.
Oh, yours is better than mine. Nice. That's so cool.
So like George said, this is one that was made by Arthur, and he painted it. It's like half size. And it's all one piece, so the lid doesn't come off or anything like that. But
yeah, he made one for me that was, full size, and the lid came off, but I put it somewhere, and I can't remember where. Somewhere.
You hit it, and you can't find your.
I can't remember where. And then I created a poem, so you guys can help me find where I lost it.
Right. You hit it in a really cool spot.
Well, so let's let Chris go, or his wife's gonna murder us and him.
Okay. It's so awesome to see you.
Thank you all for coming. I'm just gonna end stream. Bye everybody.